Welcome to the special Middletown City Council meeting for Tuesday, March 5th, 2024. Please join me by standing for a moment. Please join me for standing for the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Ms. Gank, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Farrell.
Here.
Mrs. Carter.
Here.
Mr. West.
Here.
Mr. Horn.
Here.
Mayor Slamka.
Here. And may I have a motion to receive and file the special meeting documents?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Gank, please call the roll.
Mrs. Carter.
Yes.
Mr. West.
Yes.
Mr. Horn.
Yes.
Mayor Slamka.
Yes,
Mr. Farrell.
Yes.
thank you. Okay, so now we will be discussing the draft of the 2024 to 2025 CDBG Annual Action Plan.
Okay,
Mr. Lally?
thank you, Mayor Slamka. I'd like to ask Mindy Mueller to come up and take us through a presentation on our 2024-25 Annual Action Plan, and then discuss with council if there's any parts of it you want to see added or taken apart and discussed.
Good evening. Thank you for taking time to do this this evening. Wanted to walk through a little bit of what CDBG is, just kind of make sure everybody's up to speed on the money and how it rolls down, and just give you an idea of some of the process, as well as talk about the recommendations that are in the draft for 24-25. Next slide, please. So just as a little bit of a background, the city receives every year from HUD an allocation of funds. We called CDBG, or Community Development Block Grant Funds. These funds, according to HUD, are to create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities and affordable housing. So these are dollars that come from HUD to impact the local community in this way. Next slide, please. Middletown is what they call an entitlement community. So communities across the country receive a formula allocation that HUD determines that your city should get based on a lot of different factors. I don't know their magic formula, but they come out every year and say this is the amount of money that Middletown is going to receive in CDBG funds. The amount of money that we received for this 23-24 year is that $742,828 amount. They have not announced the funds for program year 24. We're waiting. That should happen in time now. But we typically get around the same amount of money. So for working our draft annual action plan together, we used this current year's allocation to do that. CDBG has lots of requirements, as federal dollars do, and they require that all the funds that are spent from the city of Middletown meet one of three national objectives. Number one is to benefit low to moderate income households. That's one national objective. A second one that we can meet is to prevent slums or blight. And the third they allow is addressing urgent community needs. Those are not urgent the way we may think of urgent. Those are national disasters or local disasters. That's what falls into that category. So the majority of national objectives that the city of Middletown has put their activities under is that first one, to benefit low and mod income households. They also have different spending activities that are eligible as part of CDBG funds, and so that's part of that process as well. Okay, next slide, please. Some other requirements that I think are noteworthy when we think about the current year's annual action plan is there are a couple of caps that they put on the CDBG funds. One of the beautiful things about CDBG is it does give a lot of local control. So within the parameters of what the grant requires, you have a lot of authority as to how you want to see those funds allocated, but they do have some requirements. One is that there's a 15% cap on public services. So all the funds cannot be used for social services. They limit the amount of funds that can come under that category. They also have a cap on planning and administration of the dollars, at 20%, and not less than 70% of spending must benefit low to moderate income persons. So on the last page of the draft annual plan, we have the calculation that we estimate for the current 5th year, and it's 100%. That's been the pattern, that the city has always allocated the funds to benefit low and moderate income persons, but HUD's threshold is 70%. Next slide, please. So I thought it was important to kind of remind you or walk you through some of the planning process. This is the process that HUD requires for all of their grantees. So all entitlement communities are required to follow the same process. In 2019 and early 20, we put together a consolidated plan. And so there's a 5-year plan that is developed with the help of the community, lots of activity that happens around the development of that plan. And there's a 5-year plan that's put into place, that's adopted by council, and then is put forward to HUD and approved. And that 5-year consolidated plan drives what happens with those annual action plans every year. And so we're not doing the process every year, we're doing it for a 5-year period, and then the annual action plans are, this is how we're going to use the allocation to fund the priorities and activities outlined in consolidated plan. So it's a 5-year process, and then every year you do an annual action plan that says this is what we're going to do this year to further these objectives and goals. So go back just a minute, please. Thanks. So the current annual action plan that we're getting ready to discuss is year 5 of the consolidated plan. So the consolidated plan was approved in 20 and will run through April 30th of 25. The annual action plan covers May 1, which is the start of the program year, and run through April 30th of next year. Okay, I'm ready. So there is active citizen participation that HUD requires. A lot of citizen participation goes into the 5-year plan when it is developed, but there are also things we have to do for the annual action plan. There is a 30-day comment period that we are in right now. It started yesterday and runs through April 3rd, where the public has an opportunity to look at the plan and to make comments. There's a public hearing in a couple of weeks where people are invited to come and present their case or talk to you about what they see would be good uses of the dollars or what their response is to the plan. So that public hearing is part of that citizen participation and comment period. All written comments that are received in writing or done during the public hearing have to be incorporated into the plan and addressed. So all of those comments will become part of, if there are any received, will become part of the draft that will move forward. Copies of the plan are currently available on the city's website, so thank you to Deborah for making that happen. The full 5-year plan is out there, as well as the annual action plan that is up for review right now. So next slide, please. So when the consolidated plan was done in 2019 and early 20, there were 9 priorities that were put into that plan. And the idea was, once those priorities are identified, then the annual action plan speaks to those. That's how the process goes. And so I wanted to kind of just walk through what the 9 priorities are that were outlined in that plan, and then we can look at what's come in for this current annual action plan. Number 1 is to address distressed and dilapidated housing. Number 2, improve public infrastructure, especially the streets in LMI neighborhoods. Number 3 is to address beautification or visual appeal in LMI neighborhoods. And what was emphasized in the 2020 plan was starting with Oakland. That was the LMI neighborhood that was identified in the plan. Number 4 is workforce development, specifically preparing the workforce in Middletown to fill available jobs that are here. Number 5 was safe activities for youth. Next slide, please. Number 6 was to strengthen social services in the community. Number 7 was to address needs of homeless households. 8, to ensure there's appropriate housing for low and moderate income residents. And number 9 is fair housing. So those were the priorities that were put forth in the approved consolidated plan in 2020. Next slide, please. So one of the things that City Council has done previously is given an opportunity for organizations within the city to come and look at how they could help the city achieve these goals. So we do a request for proposal that goes out every year and provides an opportunity for nonprofits in the community to put forward their projects that they think will help the city achieve those 9 priorities. And so the request for proposal was made available this year for this upcoming May 1 start on November 29th. And there was a public meeting that was held via Zoom on December 12th. And that was to answer any questions about the process, about CDBG funds, just kind of give people an opportunity to ask those questions with that application in hand. And those applications were due January 26th of this year. There were 10 outside proposals that were received, plus 1 city-led project, and the totals of all those projects together were $898,409. What was recommended in the draft annual action plan was to fund 6 activities that cover 5 of the priorities. So next slide, please. These were the applications that were received. And the agencies that submitted applications. Self submitted an application for $30,000. People working cooperatively for $60,000. Abilities First put in an application for playground equipment for $120,000. Arts Central put in an application for $18,810. Legal Aid for $15,000. CBI put an application in for $90,000. That covers both youth services and workforce development activities. The Safety Council put in an application for neighborhood cleanup for $64,300. Downtown Middletown put in an application for $23,650 to help start new businesses. Warbirds put in an application to repair one of their hangars for $5,000, and then Housing Opportunities Made Equal is what HOME stands for. That's the fair housing provider in this area, and they put an application in for $15,000. So those were the applications that were submitted using that formal process and were reviewed for consideration. The recommended activities that were put forward, the numbers indicate the priority that these activities fall under. So that's what those numbers mean. There was recommendation to fill priority 1, which is, again, to address distressed and dilapidated housing through emergency home repair. And that Self was recommended for $20,000 and PWC for $60,000. Emergency home repair is really going into homeowners that fall below the income guidelines that do not have the ability to fix their homes. So it can be things like hot water heaters, repairing siding that's falling down, things that make it unlivable, that are of an emergency nature. And both of those providers provide that emergency home repair to low and moderate income households in Middletown. The next recommended activity was addresses priority number 3, which is to address the beautification and visual appeal in LMI neighborhoods, especially Oakland. And Oakland Park is what that $402,839 has been recommended to be used toward. Next slide, please. The next one, CBI, again requested 90, but was recommended at 86,424 to address 2 priority areas. One, workforce development, and the second is their youth activities. And then the last recommended activity is fair housing, and 2 providers are recommended for that. One was Housing Opportunity Made Equal for $10,000. They do a lot of education and testing when there's been a complaint of discrimination. And then Legal Aid provides assistance with people that are facing eviction or mortgage foreclosure, and they're recommended at $15,000. So this is the kind of the compilation of all of that, and you can see the whole budget. The way that we have to put it into HUD's system, which is called IDIS, is by using their categories. So it's a pretty regimented way that they want to see the information. And so that's where some of the categories come in. You can see with public services, I mentioned there's a 15% cap. We maximize that, and that's been the pattern for the last few years, to use as many dollars as we can toward public service needs. Fair housing is required, that we put some funding toward fair housing, and that does fall under that public service category. And then you can see public infrastructure is where the Oakland Park project comes in, and then housing revitalization is the category for the housing piece for the emergency repair. So that's just kind of an overview. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to review the draft. It reads okay. It reads according to IDIS, the way that they force us to put it in the system. So it's not pretty, but it keeps the high points. And again, the strategic plan is in IDIS, and then we put an annual action plan that supports that. So some of the language is even pulled over from the strategic plan that goes into the draft, just to try and make there be some consistency between the plans. That's the way that's set up in HUD, by HUD. So I just wanted to have some time to kind of just walk you through that and see if there were questions, see if I could answer or get you more information about any of that. But I'm here to answer what I can or walk you through whatever would be helpful.
I have a question.
Okay.
My question concerns Oakland Park. Why are we putting so much into Oakland Park?
I can answer it from a CDBG perspective, that in the consolidated plan, that was what was identified as one of the priority neighborhoods. So we are following that plan. That's why it has been put in terms of CDBG funds, why that's being used. If there may be other conversations or other comments about why that was selected, that was a previous council that decided this was going to be the neighborhood that was prioritized, and that's what's in the plan. And I know there's been a lot of effort to do some beautification within Oakland Park. So from a CDBG perspective, that's why, because it's in the strategic plan that's been developed for this 5-year period.
And legal aid, where is legal aid?
They have, they mostly work out of their office in Hamilton and Cincinnati. And then they will meet with people. They do a lot of their work remotely. So I don't think that they have a Middletown presence, like a permanent location in Middletown, but they only use CDBG funds to serve Middletown residents. So they get a lot of calls and will serve people from all over the region, but they use CDBG funds specifically for low and moderate income residents of Middletown.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
When it comes to Oakland Park, I believe last year's action plan also had a similar amount, 400 and some thousand dedicated to Oakland. Was that also for the park?
I would have to go back and look at that plan. I know that Oakland Park got delayed with some of the way that because these are larger projects, some of that delay was the reason that it was not allocated out of last year's, or we were going to reallocate some of those dollars to the current plan. But I would have to go back and revisit that particular question in last year's plan.
What was accomplished for the park last year out of those funds that were appropriated for last year?
I don't think there were any CDBG funds allocated or that were expended yet for Oakland Park, because there was a delay in being able to do some of the larger parts of that project. So I don't think there's been any funds expended yet out of CDBG for Oakland. But I don't remember if we still had funds allocated out of last year for Oakland. I would have to get some clarification on that. But there's been nothing expended yet.
On these funds that you mentioned about repairs for homes and such, and I think you was here before about like loans up to $7,500. Is that part of this, or is that something completely different?
It isn't. So that the previous conversation was about home dollars, which are not CDBG.
Okay.
No, it's a great question. These are repairs, whereas the home dollars are down payment assistance to try and get low-income people into homes.
Okay,
So yeah, it's a great question.
thank you.
I'm just curious on this. How many different cities do you serve? Just out of curiosity.
Well, for this particular work, only Middletown.
Okay. Very good.
That's a great
I
question.
was curious.
Yeah.
So we looked at self, and that was determined to be 20,000 to self and 60,000 to PWC.
Correct.
And what does PWC stand for again?
People working cooperatively.
And that's for emergency repairs.
Correct.
Do we know how much self could withstand? I guess how much, if we gave them, say, $100,000, would they be able to support that? Is there a maximum 60,000? Has that conversation been had?
There have been conversations around that. You'll notice when they applied for 30, and we awarded them 20, or recommended 20, and that was strictly because one of the application components makes the board approve whatever's being sought and what amount the director has to seek, and they had 20,000 approved to seek. And so that's why it was brought down from 30 to 20, not an indication of their capacity. I think that they have indicated that if they had more, they could do more. There's no limitation. Hi.
I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, Ashley and I met with Self and PWC last year just to kind of broach this topic briefly. There is a wait list. There's a substantial wait list for emergency repairs in Middletown. Sometimes as many as 40 or 50 or 60 people that are waiting to be helped. They were both, at least at the time, saying that they had capacity if we were able to give them more funding to be able to do some more work in Middletown. And we have a meeting set up with them for next Wednesday to discuss that potentially for this current year. So I know there had been some discussion about whether or not to fund them at the amounts that they had requested, or to up that in a neighborhood initiative kind of a fashion. So we are prepping that conversation for next week, and they were amenable to it in the past when we talked about it.
So we have a wait list of 40 to 60 people for emergency repairs? Sometimes, okay.
Depends on, it comes and goes, depending on how many applications they get, how many they're able to income verify that they're gonna meet the qualifications of the program to be helped.
The reason I ask is because I know one of the things that we care about is the beautification, right, upkeep of homes. And so instead of just emergency repairs, looking at maybe being a little bit more proactive and like educating and helping, even if it's not emergency necessarily, if that's a possibility. And therefore giving them more funds if they are able to handle those funds.
Right.
So that question of what their cap is, I guess, would be, I'd be interested in that answer.
Right, I am trying to avoid, we have always tried to avoid kind of oversaturating their ability. If we give them $500,000, if they can only handle $100,000 a year in repairs, then we're not helping with that activity. Thank you, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's good. That's good to know that's happening. To speak to your other concern, it doesn't fall under the cap, so there is more flexibility with how much funding could go for emergency repairs that doesn't impact by a cap.
And Mr. Lally had said that you were wanting some options and recommendations from council. Is that correct?
At the end of the day, it's up to council how this gets done and what projects. We have a process, and those recommendations come to you through the city manager's office, but it's ultimately the council's decision how you want these funds allocated. So if there are questions like you're asking where you want to consider upping self and PWC, that's up to you to do that. There's flexibility that way.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I know we didn't really get this information. We only really got it this morning, I believe. Did anybody have it before then? So I'm wondering, like, maybe we could have a little time to maybe look it over.
Yes.
And maybe have another work session before, I believe the 19th is the hearing.
Correct.
So if you guys want to discuss the possibility of a work session after we have some time to look it over and make some recommendations, that'd be, people being amenable to that possibility? Yeah? Okay. So maybe there could be a work session in between now and the 19th after we have some time to review.
That makes sense?
I have one question though. When I think of emergency repairs, I think of someone without a water heater, I'm thinking someone without a furnace, a hole in a roof.
Yes.
How do you determine, okay, when someone knows to do that, take advantage of this program, and you know that they don't have hot water, they don't have a furnace, or they have a structural issue? You're saying there's a waiting list. What's your turnaround on this?
Well, PwC and Self run their own waiting lists, so we allocate the dollars to them, and they manage that themselves. There are certain things that constitute an emergency and things that do not. There's certainly more need for general repairs than just what would constitute an emergency, but all the things that you mentioned would. And so they have their own process by which they determine what's the most urgent, and what that looks like in terms of who they serve more quickly based on that urgency.
Okay.
And you had mentioned some of the action that happens with the community. And you'd said that the information on how to comment, the public comment period, is online right now on the website. Could you walk us through where exactly on the website that is?
It's in the development services. If you go to development services, you'll see it. It's right there on the homepage of development services.
Okay, that's good. So if anybody wants to, they can go there.
They can. And one of the things I will say is that there has been more activity with social media, which has been fantastic. Things are getting out there. Even notice about this conversation was noticeably out there. And so that's really helpful, because one of the challenges is we have what HUD mandates happen, like we have to publish a legal ad, and we know that people don't make note of legal ads. I mean, people aren't typically reading those, you're Joe Public, but they require us to do that. So it's marrying what's practical and getting information from people with what is required from HUD. And so the more we can get information out to get more community involvement, the better.
Okay, so maybe that's something we could look at putting on our like events page, website. And the public hearing would then be March 19th, correct? At what time?
5:30.
There we go. All right. So that's something for people to plan for if they're interested.
Absolutely.
Are there any other questions from council at this time? Is there any other information that we need from Mr. Lally or Ms. Mueller at this time?
We have nothing. Mindy did a great job.
Thank you so much,
For
Ms.
your
Mueller.
time. I appreciate it.
All right, so at 4:58, we call this special meeting of council to a close. And we adjourn until the next,
Can I ask a question
I'm
real
so
quick,
sorry,
Mayor?
yes.
No, you're fine, don't be sorry. So if you want to plan a work session, that would obviously be public, so I guess the first question is, can we try to figure out a time for everybody before we close this out? And then second would be, so this is sort of with the conversations we've had of, do we have citizen comments, do we not have citizen comments? So now we have a work session that we have to talk about, do we allow citizen comments? And we still have a public hearing after that, which is in 2 weeks. So first off, do we want to discuss when is good for everybody, if that's what?
we can do that right now.
I'm open, so up to you guys.
All right.
And then next week I'll be out Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I'll be out of town.
Okay, so we're looking at Thursday and Friday of next week, which would be the 14th and the 15th of March. I'm available in the afternoon of the 14th, and I can be available all day Friday. Does everybody else have their calendars with them right now?
Yeah.
I'm out of town all next week.
Oh, gotcha.
So I can just be absent on this one.
Okay. If you have anything, you can always email
Yeah,
and
I
we
can
can
do that.
discuss. Yeah. And how about you, Ms. Carter? Do you have your calendar with you?
Well, you said the 15th?
We could do the 14th or the 15th, Thursday or Friday.
15th is a Friday.
Mhm.
I'm good for Friday,
Okay. Does Friday then work?
the 15th.
What time are you thinking?
What would be better for everybody, morning or afternoon? Ms. Mueller, and maybe we can get some guests there perhaps if they want to present as well. What usually works better?
Well, Personally, I would rather, I mean, when you say guests, what do you mean specifically by that?
Got you. I thought like, if perhaps, if Self wanted to be there and kind of discuss what they can do, or if we wanted to have some information from any of the services that are available, or something like that, if maybe somebody wanted to say, this is what we offer, this is what we can do, CBI could, that kind of thing, perhaps. To give, if we need that to inform us.
Personally, I've been working with these groups. This is just me personally, but I've been working with them for a few years, so I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of what they do.
Okay.
But I can do morning. I would prefer probably earlier in the morning, but
What time? Like would 9:30 work, or
yeah,
9:15?
I mean, that's fine with me.
9:30?
9:30?
Yeah,
All right.
that would work for me.
So then we would, okay, and then you want to discuss also, that's a good point, the public comments. Do we want to do public comments maybe for 10 minutes at the beginning, 2 minutes at a time? So it would be like a total of 5?
I don't like that because then you're cutting off your selections to people. I would think you would hold that for citizen comments for the following, when we actually we're having a public hearing on this for that reason. So
Gotcha.
I personally am against that, but
That makes
also I'm
sense.
open.
That makes sense because of the public hearing and because that they can actually make longer comments as well.
Mm-hmm.
Does that work for everybody else?
9:30?
9:30 on Friday,
Okay.
the 15th. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Farrell.
My only comment regarding that is that we do have to be careful not to circumvent the process that we told HUD about. So if you open up the door for other people to compete, we've already done that
Gotcha.
window. So
It'll just be us.
cautious about that.
Okay, it'll just be us.
And there's no violation by having a special work session on this or anything like that. Okay.
Because this is one too. All right, that just gives us, again, it gives us more time to be able to review and to be able to make those options and recommendations after some study. Okay, is there anything else from council before we adjourn? No. All right, well, thank you very much. So at 5:02 p.m., this meeting is adjourned until 5:30 in these chambers. Thank you.